You are listening to The Green Flame, the DGR broadcast that brings you radical analysis, practical skills, and artistic expression from the grassroots to the global. We are your hosts, Jennifer Mernan and
Max Wilbert.
On this episode of The Green Flame, we will be discussing pornography, men possessing women. Of course, first, we want to thank Andrea Dworkin. Andrea Dworkin was and continues to be one of the world's most powerful and influential radical feminists. She wrote 14 books, the most famous of which was Pornography Men Possessing Women. We honor her memory and gratefully share the inspiration she continues to provide in the ongoing struggle to destroy patriarchy. We thank Amy, Michelle J., Michelle M., Salonika, and Ben, all members of the Deep Green Book Club, for allowing us to present their conversation concerning this important work. We also wish to thank Trinity LaFay for recording her amazing poem, Tintinabulation. And finally, once again, we are very privileged to be presenting a work by Beth Quist as the musical component of this edition of The Green Flame. The composition is entitled Angel of Death. This recording is of a live acoustic performance of Angel of Death. Beth is playing all the instruments as well as being the solo vocalist. Thank you for listening, and we will begin with a few comments and tips concerning the importance of books and how to conduct discussion groups with your book club. It couldn't be more obvious how important books are in our lives. Many of the people who have become volunteers and supporters of Deep Green Resistance came because of works like Endgame. I've heard over and over again as a supporter how many people have said they read these books like Endgame, Language Older Than Words, Deep Green Resistance, and it completely changed their perspectives and their lives and the trajectory of their activism. So the process of creating a book club or a book discussion group is a fantastic way to spread revolution. Some of the very first community organizing events undertaken by Deep Green Resistance were around discussion groups organized around the book Deep Green Resistance. And they were quite successful and continue to be so. There are some important factors that can contribute to a successful book group or book discussion group. First, you have to decide really what the focus of that group is. And for the Deep Green Book Club, the focus is around anti-civ work and understanding the structures behind all forms of oppression of the natural world as well as of societies and human beings that are caught within the horrible structures of capitalism and colonization. It's a long list as far as how you can pick books for a club of that nature. There are other book clubs, groups that I personally have been part of. One of the ones that was very attractive to me was the Showing Up for Racial Justice Book Club, whose focus and foundation for choices was around undoing racism or understanding racism as a group of white allies to the Black Lives Matter movement. So it's very important to remember some simple rules, like what is the focus? What is the purpose of that book club? What are you doing when you select your books, and how are you going to discuss those and have the maximum amount of communication and understanding as a result of your conversations? There is no right or wrong way to become a facilitator for a book club, but there are some very right things to do with the conversation. Of course, it's always important to set some parameters around group norms and the way the group will conduct itself. Is there going to be a leader of the discussion? for this particular discussion, do you want to choose some questions as conversation prompts? Do you want to just simply go around and share the perspectives and let every person have equal time in the discussion? Set some boundaries around that and some realistic expectations about how much time you have before you finish the work. With the Andrea Dworkin, Pornography Men Possessing Women, there was a 3-month period for the entire group that had committed to reading that work to complete that reading. So that was a really reasonable time parameter for the group. And then with the Surge reading group, generally would finish a book within 2 or 3 months, depending on the length of the work, with meetings in person rather than online, as you know, is the possibility now, and then a 2-hour session that allowed every single person to go into great depth about what they understood and to have back and forth in conversations. That one was structured with the go-around of everyone providing their perspective, and then a second go-around where, you know, you could go back and forth. But that first go-around was very much so that you could make sure that every single voice was heard. And as a facilitator, that's always important. You want to make sure that it's safe and it's comfortable and that everyone is respected and has the ability to speak, that there's no one dominating a conversation, and that the group is open to being able to have some really deep, safe conversations about some incredibly hard subjects. As revolutionaries, we want to go in and go in deep for the truth. And I think that that's what this conversation does around this work by Andrea Dworkin. So without further ado, those are some guiding principles to keep in mind. There's lots of information out there online that will go into more depth about how to do reading discussion groups, but those are some practical tips. And now, without further ado, let's go into the experience of listening to a book discussion group around Pornography, Men Possessing Women, as well as a one-on-one conversation with Amy, once again discussing pornography, men possessing women.
I'm Michelle Martin. I live on the occupied lands of the Dehumanization people in South Central, what we call Alaska, and I have not actually read the book. I just came to listen in because I thought I'd get something out of hearing the discussion, but I have not read the book.
I'm Michelle Jones. I live in Massachusetts. I read the book in college, and I'm with Michelle, listening in on the discussion. Very interested in hearing everybody else's thoughts. And I just have a horrible dream about the book.
Okay, so my name is Salonika, and I'm from Nepal, and I just finished reading the book.
I'm Ben. I'm from London. Yeah, I finished reading the book yesterday, actually.
Thank you, everybody, for being in the circle and for wanting to enter into what I think is going to be a pretty intense conversation. I found the book to be very, very intense. And I went through and just started asking a few questions to prompt our discussion. First one is, we go around and all of us offer a definition of what pornography is now that you've read this work?
For me, I think pornography is like it's any form of media that depicts that sexualizes anybody, that in an unnatural way, that is outside the boundaries of a normal, healthy sexual relationship, I guess. That's what I got after reading the book, basically. Yeah, basically, and yeah, and Dworkin also says about the difference between pornography and erotica, right? So, uh, yeah, that's what I thought the difference between the two was. Is it something that happens in a normal, healthy relationship or something outside of it? And in our culture, the pornography is right now based on the subjugation of women, and it is a tool uh, that helps the patriarchal values, or maybe like defends the patriarchal domination of women. That's it.
Yeah, I guess for me, my definition of pornography would be any kind of media that is whose aim is to objectify a person through a sexualized lens. You got anything?
And just add that it's the commodification of the human female body into that definition. Just add that in. And another part that I want to add in is that I think it's interesting that she uses the definition of that pornography is a whore, because that goes right to the dichotomy that where women are shoved into that really small space. They could be only two things. They could be virgins like Mother Mary, or they can be whores, so they can be fuckable, or they could be the fucked. So I think it's interesting that she uses that. So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, what you've all said, I agree with, and also, Dworkin talked about the root of pornography and how the ponis, I think, were Greek whores, but they were the lowest kind of class of whores, because there was a hierarchy of whores in Greece. Apparently, I never knew this before, and the ponis were the lowest. So it's not just the graphic depiction of whores, but she says it's the graphic depiction of vile whores.
The next question I had for the group was, why do you think pornography is so credible in the cultures that we live in? Why is it credible? And I can remember reading some of these passages where just the sheer repetition and the absurdity of these violent scenes where women are being degraded and dehumanized and beaten. Why is any of that credible to anybody or acceptable?
I think it's because it's a mere, it's just a representation of how women are already viewed in this culture. Like like she said that it is a form of violence against. It is a cultural hatred of women, right? So the hatred already exists. So in a way, that's why it becomes credible. Like as she said, it's not that if it was the other way around, if the men were the ones who were being depicted as as being violated, that would not make sense in this culture, because men are the superior, like they are viewed as the superior people, right? So yeah. And also I remember that she says a lot about commodification of women. So it's also the capitalist values that makes everything justifiable if money was given. Like from the time of Sage, right? Like they tried to buy off his victims. Like after he had forcefully locked them up, and after it came out, and then everyone said, but he paid her after that. So right now it's the same thing, like because the porn, like the people in the pornography, they get paid. So that makes everything justifiable.
I think it's because this culture is just completely mad, insane, and there were parts of the book that were describing other books. I couldn't read them because they were, I mean, I just had to skim read them because they were just so deranged and demented. You know, she described a pornographic book, she described a so-called literature book, and another kind of so-called lefty pornographic book, and they were just completely insane. And I just found them too disturbing to read, so I just had to skim past the descriptions of the book and go to her analysis, which had sanity, you know. But I don't know, there was just something about those books that just really made me feel really, really uneasy, because it's almost like looking into the insane heart of civilization, you know, this horrible, twisted, just horrible. I don't know, I can't even put it into words, really.
I agree with you entirely, Ben. And the most traumatic thing about looking into that insanity, I agree with you. The culture is entirely insane. The people in it are insane. Was that I physically lived through some of that, especially the pieces around, you know, B&D, S&M, Story of O stuff. That's part of my history, is having gone through some of that abuse. So I had a physical body reaction to this descent into hell. And it's madness and it's hell. So I agree with all of that. Michelle, you said that when you read it, you had dreams about it?
Yeah, I did.
About
The dream that I had is vivid. I was on a road at night, alone, walking, and it was a journey of some sorts, where it was epically ongoing night after night after night, because I was processing like you, Jennifer, I was in the sex industry and had my own personal experiences to work through. And the way that she wrote the book kind of validated that hellish experience that we had in there. And I didn't have words for it. I didn't have a way to describe it, but she put words to it. So that it started me in that process of healing and feeling like, oh, you know what? I'm not the whore. I'm not this. This is this culture that's imposed this on me. The dream was me walking in, like I said, at night, and I was walking past cities along the water that were absolutely abandoned, and there was a few scatterly kind of, people left behind, scavenging and trying to survive. And then I ended up going up a straight road, so straight up that I felt like I was going to fall back just from the sheer angle of the road. And then I eventually came into an enclave of, mountains and stones on an ocean area. And then there was a house sitting on the ocean. And then so they're laid out in that house on the ocean, in that little enclave, that little safe place. And my experiences that it drew up were in the basement of that house. So I ended up traveling and moving through the house through my dreams, and the whole basement was the sex industry. So that shows the hierarchy. I was on the very lowest, darkest level, and I was trying to work my way through all of that processing. So
that's a challenging question. Or when I first heard it, the question of why is this believable? It's a good thing to investigate, because it is just accepted. Like the lies of the pornographic culture are so accepted by especially by men in this culture, but also by women. That's a normal way to try and be and to model our sex lives after, if we're just going to be normal, healthy people. And why is that believable? Because
it's so pervasive.
Yeah, and that's what I was coming to in terms of an answer, is just that we as humans, the way that we work is to take on whatever culture we're raised in, and this is the culture that we're raised in. So that's why it's believable, is just because that's how our bodies work, is that we believe the culture around us, so that we can survive in it.
Well, and we kind of follow in, like she says, it's so pervasive that when you look around, you're like, oh yeah, that's just the way it is. So it's normalized to the point where you have no choice but to function in it and accept it at some level, in order for you to sustain yourself in the culture. When you start countering this, they're like, what's wrong with you? This is normal. This is the way just things are. And
So I just remembered something when Michelle said, it's just so sad that it's internalized by most women, and because well, it's just like I guess there's some part of them that knows that there's a problem in that, but like because they are raised in this culture, so they basically agree with it. So yeah, it's kind of very sad actually.
The next question I had is also a really tough one. It's how do power and sadism and dehumanization work in pornography?
This is a very difficult question to answer, I guess. Um, but I think that pornography is just like it's kind of a compensation for patriarchy. Like, uh, mm, you know, uh, in most scenarios, like the women have been subjugated for a long time. So if they make any strides, like for systemic opposition to that, like perhaps let's say, like for example, like in the past few decades in the South Asia, like women are getting more of a financial autonomy, and then the rapes have increased. So it's basically, it's just pornography is also another mean to just tip the balance, to balance the whatever uh, form of whatever strides women make to get into the equal level of men, I guess. So basically, yeah, that's how, for me, that's how power plays in pornography. Like it, it reinforces that there is a hierarchy, and this is the proper way that it should be. And one of the more, yeah, that's probably it, I guess.
I don't think, was that the original question?
It was how does power, sadism, and dehumanization work in pornography? How does it work?
My only response to that is it works because it's on the body level. It goes right at the root. So this has been consistent with my understanding of trauma and with my experience of trauma. If you can get something on the body level, that's where the root of all of these things are happening. Is if you can change our innate ability to connect with other human beings, and then if you can tap into those innate qualities of people on the body level, then you own that you actually are directing the function of a biological being. You're rerouting it or redirecting biology towards the aim of the perpetrator. So how does it work? They hijack the body. They hijack our innate and empathy. They hijack our own capacity to connect with other human beings and switch it around to support the narration of the perpetrator. So that's all I have to add to that. That's how it works,
I guess the only thing I'd add is that those three things, power, sadism, and dehumanization, are kind of fundamental to what pornography is. And if you take them away, then I don't know, does that mean then that it's not pornography if you take those three things away? I don't know. But they're fundamental to it, definitely.
And I just kind of wonder if that's different than anything else that's done by this culture. If the violence is what you do to maintain domination and control over the living world or women's bodies or, you know, whoever, that all the relationships have been replaced by this violence rather than connection. And it's done, you know, as soon as you're born, before you're born, by this culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I would agree. It wouldn't be pornography. It wasn't, you know, that's what it is. Thank you. Is there a difference between pornography and erotica then? Once again, going back to the book, I'd like to read something that Dworkin wrote about that. She says, but in the male sexual lexicon, which is the vocabulary of power, erotica is simply high-class pornography. Better produced, better conceived, better executed, better packaged, designed for a better class consumer, as with Call Girl and Streetwalker. One is turned out better but both are produced by the same system of sexual values and both perform the same sexual service. Because that is an argument that's made by pornographers is, oh, it's just, you know, it's erotica. Or what was said earlier too, they chose to do it, they bought it. So, you know, they've been bought, so it's all good now. That's a capitalist, you know, consumerist thing, is everybody's a commodity. You're a commodity, you were bought, so perform your function. I would say personally that in this culture, I don't think there's a difference. I think that I would agree with Dworkin on that. Would you?
I don't really know what erotica is, but like I wanted to add something like, do you know like there's kind of a movement called the make love not porn and stuff like that. So I wanted to ask like, what do you guys think about that?
I don't know. I've heard that catchphrase before, but I didn't know if I don't know about a movement.
No, basically there's a website and it is anti-porn, and what it does is like people can upload their videos which they have like well, it does not have a plot or anything in it, and yeah, it's I guess it's supposed to mean that those depict more, you know, normal relationship and all. So I don't really I heard the TED talk of the creator of that website basically. So yeah, what do you guys think of that idea?
I think it's incredibly important to reclaim sexuality and not allow it to be hijacked by porn, as I think porn's it's very, very addictive and very, very destructive, and making love is an entirely different thing.
Yeah,
it's not a thing at all, you know, it's a relationship. So I like the phrase a lot, and I don't even know what that would look like. But I applaud the effort because I think that the poem that is going to be part of this conversation is about the real attempt to be released from that trap. So, anybody else?
Yeah, I haven't heard of that website, but it sounds like a good idea in theory. Yeah.
I want to make it an important distinction in erotica and pornography. It doesn't matter the contents. Never. So like we talk about, if we take away sadism and all this other stuff, is it pornography? I would argue if it's being sold, it's pornography. If any sexuality is being sold, it's pornography. So just the act of commodifying sexuality creates as a pornography kind of context. So it doesn't actually mean the content. I hear this argument online all the time about the content. Oh, soft porn. Oh, they're showing love. They're showing relationship. But you just commodified relationship. Even if it's in the context of a loving relationship, you've sold it. You've put it into the community and it's being purchased. So you can't actually have any pornography, or you can't have any content when it's being sold that's not pornography. So, okay. That's the only distinction I wanted to make.
Are we ready to move on to kind of a final insight about the book and just go around with that? Or do we have some more talk to do about erotica and pornography, if there's a difference between them? What does the group think?
I think we can move to the next question from my side.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So the only other question that I had was, what part of this book had the most impact on you, and what will you never forget?
For me, I think it was the initial part of the book, where she puts out the stories of all these women and girls who have been impacted by pornography. So that was very difficult to read, and it was it just like reminded me, like, how pervasive the effects of pornography are. Like, it fed a lot of different stories, right, of women of different backgrounds, even girls. So, I guess before that, I like never thought that it might have such a huge impact on everyone, basically. Yeah.
It helped me heal. That was the greatest thing about that book. It helped me heal. It helped me realize that I wasn't alone, that this wasn't just about, it wasn't me. There wasn't something inherently wrong with me, that this was a cultural problem. Yeah, that's what I got out of the book.
I think one of the things I got out of the book was just how demented and twisted pornography is and this culture is, but also that's the extreme side of pornography, but then that kind of filters through into the mainstream and made me think about films, just standard mainstream Hollywood films I've seen, and then you kind of think about the sex scene and you think, oh, that wasn't actually sex, that was rape. Because at first the woman in a lot of these scenes in mainstream films, and it still happens now, the woman says no at first, and then the man forces it, and it's rape. But in the film, it's not seen as rape or depicted as rape. It's depicted as normal lovemaking, and that is, I think, also pornography is an extremely effective brainwashing tool. It turns people into men, into psychopaths almost. So it's an extremely effective tool.
Yes, thank you, Ben. And it doesn't, that goes back to the content. Does it really matter in the context of things? It's just bringing people through that whole process of sadism. So if you can commodify something that seems healthy, you could take someone to the next step of sadism and the next step, because at the end of this, it is full-blown necrophilia. So it's just a way of moving people through all the levels of sadism and getting deeper into sadism. So if you can get the mainstream to accept the very simplest level of commodification of sexuality and love, you can move them through the rest of that at different points in society. It's just funneling people into sadism. Thank you, Ben.
An important point that I found while reading the book was that, it just plays into the liberalization, like the whole idea of liberal, the liberalization policies. It's not like, right now the women, like, if you hear more about the arguments of women, this is like, they have a right to be to be involved in the sex industry and all. And it's just like, like Ben said, like, they've brainwashed the males to be a psychopath, and they brainwashed the females to make them feel as if they want to be used, they want to be possessed, and they want to be violated. And that plays out not just in the sex industry, but even in the personal relationships and everything. And yeah, and if you oppose it, then, like, the left supports it, like, by saying that it is their choice and everything. And then, but I really, what I feel every time is that it is never a choice. It is the culture that they have been raised on that makes them believe that it is their choice. But actually, it's not a choice. If that's the only thing you know.
If we were successful in ending pornography, if pornography didn't exist anymore at all in our culture, what would that feel like? What would that look like?
Well, to be honest, I don't think it would actually make any difference in the power differential, because it is already there, and women are already dehumanized, and they are already subjugated, whether or not the pornography exists. But well, of course, it will make some difference, but like, it would not totally end the subjugation of women, I guess. Yeah, it sounds kind of pessimistic. I realize that.
It's really hard for me to even picture anything like this culture without it, though, without pornography. So it's hard to separate it out from all the other mechanisms of oppression of women, because it's such an just woven into the fabric of this culture. Yeah.
Well, there's a happy thought. Maybe the culture would cease to exist.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It definitely would be nice to take that pillar out.
Mm-hmm.
It would look like better relationships. Yeah. It would look like people having relationships, real relationships, human relationships. It would look like men wouldn't be able to go get their fix. They would actually have to start engaging with women and listening to women at some level. And it's so they would have to start negotiating this culture at some level with women, rather than turning to an artificial play of this culture. They would actually have to know people and get to know people. So I think better relationships without pornography. That's what I would see. Better conversations, more real conversations, better relationships. It's really hard to subjugate someone if you start seeing them as human beings. It's really difficult. Yeah.
What I keep thinking is without pornography, women and girls would have so much less internalized hatred, internalized misogyny, because it's just everywhere, and it just is constantly teaching girls what their place is in this culture.
Yeah.
And so without that, just a lot more
Less
self-esteem.
eating disorders, less women falling prey to this trap. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that might be good is, like you said, that it just goes to the physical body. I guess it does that for the men as well. For the ones who consume the porn, it's more like it is related to something physical for them. So I guess it is for that reason that they have internalized the porn so much. Like, it's been so successful in brainwashing men, basically. So perhaps if you take out the physical equation, then it would not be as successful, perhaps.
I mean, it would look better, but I don't know whether it would actually be better. Maybe it would. I think it would be better, but it would still need there would still be things that needed to change.
I think it would take a long time to heal the trauma of having had pornography in the culture. A long time.
Yeah.
Because your body would be, carries all of those memories and all those scars, and it'd still be really hard. You'd still have to work through connections and trusting connections. So we're discussing our very first book in the DGR reading group, just Amy and I right now. And the book is Andrea Dworkin's Pornography Men Possessing Women. We read for about 3 months, and some of us finished it within just a few days. Amy, what was your experience of the read?
The length of the time, or the general experience?
The general experience and the length of the time.
I have to give a bit of preamble to that. I've known about this book for about 5, 6, 7 years, and I've never wanted to read it because I didn't want to get into the trauma of what women experience. And after the first few paragraphs, I was blown away by her analysis, so I gobbled it up. I think I read about 2/3 of the book, maybe just over a half, in about 8 hours in one day on a long train trip. Yeah.
My experience was in fits and starts. When the book got into the very graphic descriptions of the abuse in pornography, I would get sick and have to look away for a little while and then go back in. But it was also part of the impact of the book itself for me. It was absolutely necessary to reach the kind of understanding that Andrea did to be able to write it. And I can see also why it was incredibly hard for her to get it published.
Of course.
Yeah.
I was aware of, so in my work, I've listened to first-hand accounts from children and women of being hurt in this way, not necessarily in pornography, but in violent abuse, sexual abuse. And I've listened to Gail Dines speak more than once on the topic of pornography and the harm it causes. So I was braced for that. I was braced for the impact of the trauma when I was reading, but I found it more, not palatable, that's the wrong word, but but I didn't struggle too much with it because she set the book so carefully in analysis that it made so much sense. So it was, it was just incredible.
Maybe you have a perspective on this. One of the things that has come up in conversations around this book, for me anyway, was Lierre's comment that it's so much worse now than when she wrote that book. You have on-the-ground experience of women and children that are going through this abuse. Is that accurate in your experience?
Oh, 100%. So I've worked with children and young people from when I was 21. And I'm quite a bit older than that now, so I'd say 25 years. I was very naive when I first started working with people. But even in the 16 years that I've worked in children's mental health, it's definitely got worse. I have some life stories, life experiences that have been told to me that that I will never forget, that will haunt me to my grave, definitely. In order to heal, in my opinion, from trauma, so going back to the trauma that I've heard, and if you want to be clear about that, I've been able to bear it with them, with these girls and sometimes boys and women, and I've not been shocked and I've not turned away from their distress. So by being able to bear witness to their distress, I think it lends them strength. But one of the difficulties of being able to sit with your own pain on your own or with another person is being able to be in your body. And you have to feel that your body is a safe place. And you have to feel that your body is in a safe place in the environment, to trust that your environment's safe. And for so many women and girls, it just isn't. So your body isn't safe. Your very body isn't safe. It's an incredible situation that we're trying to offer therapy to women and girls who've experienced such gross trauma, and yet their bodies aren't safe. They have nowhere to go in their own mind that's safe.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that experience. Yeah, the book got very, very personal for me because I've been through like B&D, S&M abuse and groomed by an older man into it. And it's still very difficult to open up those slammed doors inside of me. Difficult to feel my body at times.
Yeah.
Frequently, kind of a disconnect right around my throat between my head and my body. And really hard to even look at it. And this book did that. And in a way where I was okay with that.
That's amazing. And I think you have to be brave to go there, don't you, sometimes?
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it takes a long time, and getting into a safe space, which I live in a women's only space, to be ready to do that. I don't know that it's something that I would have been able to approach 20 years ago even at all, or 10 years ago, or maybe even 5.
Jen, I couldn't have read this book even 5 years ago. It wouldn't, and I don't mean I couldn't have borne the trauma of it or the distress of it. It just wouldn't have made sense. I wouldn't have been able to internalize what Andrea was framing for me. So if I'd have tried, it would have been one of those books I'd shelved and would never have gone back to. So in a way, I'm glad I waited till I was older and had more understanding of how to do it. So yeah, I'm with you on that. It's a book you have to be ready for.
You have to be ready for it, and it's also stylistically it's challenging. It's really challenging, and she's an incredible writer too. I don't know.
She really is. And you can see how much she read to get to that. I mean, her experiences for sure shine through, but you know, there were so many books: John Stoltenberg, Simone de Beauvoir, The Mermaid and the Minotaur. There were so many books that she read to enable her to get to that point, so that she could write a book for us or for me to anchor into her analysis. I thought she's just incredible.
Well, I don't know how I can't imagine the strength of being able to maintain an emotional equilibrium in writing the passages, the graphic descriptions of the pornography itself. And at the same time I was reading those, the sheer monotony of it, the brutal, just like repetition of what's going on with the violence. There was a cadence there that also was, I don't know how to say it. It got to the truth of it, that it is just, everyday stuff. That this is just, it's monotonous and relentless in its execution.
Certainly.
And that was in the writing style too. We had some, I put together some questions, if you'd like to approach those a bit.
Fire away with questions, yeah.
Okay. One of them is, what is your definition of pornography?
Well, it's anything that really disrespects, violates a woman sexually. I mean, it could be, back 30, 40, 50 years ago, even before I was born, there were what we would define as pornography was really shocking, but it was really, really quite gentle. I mean, the power imbalance was there, but these days it's incredibly violent. I don't know if I have a definition for pornography, but the analysis that Andrea was offering was how, so just going through some of her points in the first chapter was how violent and self-obsessed, how violent pornography is nowadays, well, in the 80s and now, and how self-obsessed men were, and also how disconnected they are from their responsibility to treat other people, human beings, women, with respect and gentleness. So I guess if you put that together, that's pornography, isn't it? It's violent, self-obsessed, disconnected from empathy, disconnected from a responsibility towards the harm that they cause. While I was reading, I was struck by the power of naming, and if we as women don't have the power to name ourselves, so historically there was the two tropes, Madonna or whore, you're either one or the other, but we were named, you're either good or bad, Eve or Lilith. So there was the power of naming, whether it was Madonna, whore, Lilith, Eve, almost gives the power of ownership of money, of power, of wealth, of whatever. And it's a massive power imbalance, isn't it? If you've got the power to name something and you own something, then you can decide if women are believed or not. And when they were talking about the Marquis de Sade 200 or 300 years ago, that was almost the beginning of women not being believed. He behaved abominably to scores of women who weren't believed.
Right. They were completely disempowered by the culture.
That's and you know that with children I see, or I've seen over the years, the children who were called naughty or distracted and told off for those things will become naughty and distracted and end up being labeled. So yeah, you the power of naming something creates it in a way. Mm-hmm. And I was fascinated and furious when I was reading, because I've always known, well, ever since I started having frank conversations with women as a teenager, always known that women gave life. We grew life in our wombs, and then we literally, our bodies opened up and we gave life. We produced life. And in the book, when Andrea Dworkin was analysing Simone de Beauvoir's essay on the Marquis de Sade and talked about the penis giving life, I was so angry with the lie of it. Not that they didn't contribute, of course, it's a valuable contribution. Without it, we wouldn't be able to give life. But there was something in the power of that naming which took power away from women, and she framed that so powerfully for me. I was reading on a train, and I think I was on my own, and I had my earphones in, and I literally out loud said, "That's not true," or something like that.
Mm.
Pretty sure I had some odd looks. It was forceful, really forceful, the way that was framed.
It's insane.
It is.
And it's one of the foundational myths, I think, of civilizations in general, is that men give birth, or women are an aside of some kind. It's a structure of domination and subordination that's woven into so many civilizations.
I think it's fascinating to strengthen that point as well, that how lesbians emasculate men. Because their resistance to being in sexual contact with men is, and there's lots of pornography is about, how men can. I don't even like talking about it because it's just so foul. But yeah, I really dislike it.
Yeah, I think that's why lesbianism itself is such an affront to patriarchy that you have to enforce this, and you have to enforce it very violent. Obviously, I mean, it's enforced violently. Patriarchy is, and lesbians catch the brunt of it
because they will not be subjugated.
Right.
And the power of pornography, or the power of the naming and the owning, is that it's held. You will conform to the you're either good or bad. You're either a whore or a Madonna, or and if you don't allow yourself to be subjugated, then you'll be punished.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that stuck out for me is how in the early on in the book she talked about the camera being representative of the penis. So you get these really quite odd views of a bottom in the air or legs akimbo, and that's what gets people off. But the camera is the penis. The camera is a representative of what the penis would do. So sometimes you're not actually watching an act. You have a view of something, which I thought was quite interesting. If you frame that with the male gaze, it's clearly set up for that, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very disturbing to me. That feels like I'd forgotten that part, and it puts you in the position of being the abuser, being the violator, constantly,
and owner.
And owner.
And back to the naming part. If you have the power, you or I or a man has the power of naming, then if the woman is acting outside of that framework of the name, i.e. lesbians, you're not a real woman. And if you're not a real woman, you can be treated in any way that the person abusing you feels like. And lie, oh, she likes it. So to state she is not a woman unless she acts like a woman that he has defined, and that they can say that without scrutiny because he has the power of naming, I thought was just incredible. And these little bits that she puts in the book wouldn't have made sense to me 5 years ago, the power and how it's misused.
Right. Why do you think pornography is credible in society? Andrea tried so valiantly to have it abolished, to have it outlawed, and the left. I love that quote about pornography is a vast graveyard where the left has gone to die.
Yeah.
The default is always misogyny, by whatever means or whatever justification or whatever upside down necessary. It's just the way things are,
So I remember meeting somebody 6 or 7 years ago, maybe more, and I was in a feminist network. I was very new to it. And she made a comment, a radical feminist made a comment that women were not viewed as human. And I remember thinking it was utterly a ridiculous comment. But it stayed with me because I didn't believe it. But I wanted to understand how she would get to that point of view. And through listening and reading and spending time with the women, I do understand. And so going back to what I was saying about if you don't behave within the framework of the name that you've been given, i.e. not as a real woman, then you're not viewed as a real woman. And so you can then be treated in any way that you like. And the lie perpetuated that it's not really that harmful, that child abuse, sexual abuse isn't really that bad. Or, it wasn't a violent rape. It was, it wasn't that bad. And, women in pornography actually like it. They choose it. They're not sexually exploited as children into it, of course.
And more and more all the time with pedophilia. It's like, well, they're naturally sexual and, they asked for it.
Yeah,
that's so vile.
It's repugnant. So back to your question, why is it allowed?
Wow.
Because it's so implicit in society. The wrongness and the lies and the different veils over the truth are so multifaceted that in order for me to fully understand that women aren't treated as human, I spent 7 years on, I spent at least 2 or 3 years thinking about that. And I dedicated that time in my head and in reading time to get to that point. So I wouldn't expect somebody who isn't prepared to dedicate any time to the analysis to believe me. So if you or I said to a woman or a man or anyone, oh, it should be outlawed, it's actually wrong, you can completely understand why they think we were a prude or frigid or anti-sex, I think some feminists get called, which is utter nonsense. But yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
It's so pervasive. It's what happens every single day, and you can't see it. It's the same. I kind of feel about it the same way that I felt about reading Jensen's Endgame. It's like, why haven't I seen this before? It's right in front of me every single day. This is just what's going on.
And his concepts of human supremacy, I mean, they're groundbreaking, and yet
it's so obvious. It's so obvious.
And I think that objectification, even to the point of sexual fetish, what Andrea was saying is that that just can't exist outside a context of power. And that's why we have gender, sex, as a protected characteristic. That's originally why it was in that legally as a protected characteristic in terms of the Equality Act in certainly in Europe, in the UK, because there's an imbalance of power. What's going on? And I think lots of women that I know we're in, we share some groups and some women as friends, and I know lots of women who've worked incredibly hard to overcome the trauma that they've experienced. I particularly liked Andrea Dworkin's framing when she talks about, she quotes actually, a free mind cannot exist in a colonialized body. And again, if I'd have tried to understand that sentence 5 years ago, I wouldn't have had a clue what she was on about. Such a short sentence means so much. It's phenomenal.
Would you say that again?
A free mind cannot exist in a colonialized body.
That's transformative right there.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So these sentences I'm reading on a crowded train, and I'm holding it together barely, thinking I wanted to celebrate. It felt, in a way, I'd freaked and been worried about reading this book, but it felt like a celebration to me, because she was so incredible. There's a few questions that I have that I wanted to discuss in a group, but obviously I missed the group talk. So I'd
love to hear those questions.
Okay. With Simone de Beauvoir's essay on the Marquis de Sade, I think, from memory, Andrea was talking about that the idea in his writing that he died for every sexual crime you committed. So he did all of his perversions and blazed the trail so you wouldn't have to. That was kind of the juxtaposition of it. And it made me think, well, if that's what the Marquis de Sade died for, or he was almost trying to present himself as Christ-like. So, because Jesus died on the cross for all your sins. And that struck me as incredibly narcissistic. I just wondered if anyone else had read the book and come across things that were parallels with actually some quite personality disordered ways of thinking.
In that position, in this culture, to me, it just makes sense that you would assume that it's a liberatory act for all of the other people in your class, for all men, to be able to
be free.
Be free.
Yeah, he talks about the courage to be, doesn't he? And he viewed himself as a victim when he was persecuted and imprisoned, that it really wasn't his fault. He was being courageous, and other people couldn't see how courageous he was. It was the lie. It's going back to the lie again.
But at the same time, I think the truth of how men see themselves in this culture and what their rights and privileges are, it's almost hypocrisy for them to send him up for this. This is what they assume. This is the level of violence that they assume against every being that's under them. I think that there's, I mean, it is incredibly sick, but I do think the culture is that sick. And I do think that to greater or lesser degrees, that's the entitlement that men act from.
I agree. And one of the analogies that they use, which I found disturbing in the book, was she was talking about how experiences can be used to justify. So I think she talked about Jewish women going willingly into the ovens to be killed. I can't remember whether, sorry, my history isn't good, whether they knew that that's what was going to happen. I'm not sure. But and there was a parallel drawn between that and the idea that women want it or assent to whatever horror is forced upon them willingly. And the lie is so deeply embedded into how we think, maybe not you and I, but how one thinks about pornography and abuse of that kind, that women would want it. And it connects quite deeply to tears, hot tears, actually, real rage and upset for those women who would have gone willingly into being killed or willingly into pornography. I feel deeply sad. Very sad about that.
I think that you've already said this. What part of the book had the most impact on you, and what will you never forget?
It's got to be the lie. It's got to be the lie. And the power to name. And actually, if we're honest, or if we're connecting the dots, the Marquis de Sade, in all of his narcissism and arrogance, didn't claim the power to name. That was on the back of the persecution of women through the witch trials and the creation of Christianity.
Yep.
So if we're looking at the seed of this lie, it began centuries and centuries ago.
Yes.
And it was almost as if when I fully understood what she was saying about what Andrea was saying about that I will never forget it. You don't have any power over me. You believe you do, because you believe that you can name and fit me into whatever context you feel fit, but it isn't who I am.
My name is Trinity LaFay. I've put out a few books of poetry and meditations and various works over the years. My most recent poem I decided to publish by itself. I've been tasked with working the door at an erotic poetry festival at the Mercury Cafe for the past couple of years, and it's a wonderful job. But I was starting to get a little disheartened about the nature of the poems that people were reading, and I felt like women were missing and the goddess was missing, and wondered what it would look like if I were to try to write an erotic poem for this. For the men reading the things that I was hearing them say that were not pleasant. And I wrote a little blurb that I really want men to read at the end of the poem, but I figured for women, because of the nature of it, best to just start out with this little blurb, and it is: Tintinnabulation is a poem about what is happening, not what I wish were happening, not what I think is a good idea. It is too much to ask of women that we put our bodies on the line for men to whom we are simply not real. It is about what women have long done and long suffered for doing. It is my most fervent conviction that it ought not to be this way, and that we should set about making it different as soon as possible. I strongly urge men to stop trying to convince women of their deadly otherliness, lest we become convinced. And that's really it. So without any further ado, Tintinnabulation. Before the sky was a lordly obelisk, when the vanic verdant earth was simply haloed in watery breaths to helix a trail, we were wild together. The pleasures of ripe, of juice, of warm, were atmospheric. We grew strong and noble, so proud of each other, exalted by the praise of one so admirable, so lovely, so capable. I knew we would ever live to dazzle, to be in awe. Lover twins, we dwelled in honor together, under the ocean of our ancestors' air as they stood around us, a food forest home. We meet now under the telescopic sky, under layers of stories of untellable, infinite, unknowable horror, replaced with layers of lies, layers of putrid bodies, poison land, acid skies. The water runs out of our hands remembering us. The water must be confused. We come to each other confused. I stand on the ground in front of you, but you do not see me. You stand on the ground in front of me, but you are infatuated with the sky. The monolith speaks to you in quiet tones. It purrs to you that you can have anything, that you can do anything, that you can be anything. But it is not true. You have forgotten what is true. You would like to be a sky god. You would like your name to outlive the sun, and the glory of the better story than your life echo inside that name forever. You would like sovereignty. You have forgotten that your name is a pattern older than the sun, and that we are the truth's repercussion from the inside out. I remember, because the monolith does not speak to me. It shows me the world from behind your eyes and your hands instead. I learn about your God this way, from the things you tell me, from how you touch things, from how you don't see. I have come here for you, but you do not recognize me, and I do not expect this to be painless or easy. I have forgotten some things too, things that only you remember. But I cannot tell when you're lying, because you no longer know the difference between your voices. You don't know the truth to say it. You've grabbed me, tugged at me, taken from me, carelessly and without regard. You've plunged and prodded and pounded and pulled and plundered and pinned and punctured and pilloried. You've lied that you've mistaken me, that I said that I desired, sought, and enjoyed all of these things, that you believed that I was so convincing. All of these things you do now. You push and overpower, and I wait for you to see me. You say you are selfish and greedy and need more and couldn't care less, and that you are very visual, and I do not believe you. I hold you off as best I can and wait for you to see me. I know what I feel like under your hands. I have forgotten how to eat. I know what you see when you look at me. I have forgotten how to be inside myself. You say sex, but you mean rape, and you do not know this. With the whisper in your ear, you cannot tell the difference. I know what your initiative means for me. I have forgotten how to stop you. You are not a stranger. I do not want to hurt your feelings. You do not hear me wait. You do not see that you have hurt everything. You still say you see something convincing. You lie. But it is you. I can see you wondering. The whisper is gone and the question turns over in your mind. You are not convinced. You say you are a thrall, that you are not my kin, that you are undeserving, and I do not believe you. I wait. A murmur moves across your eyes and reclaims you. Again, you morph into a creature dwarfed by its own grandiosity, holding your hoard of treasured information hostage for the price of my body. You look at it and see nothing. I am here to take you home with me. Lost forest for my trees, I am no stranger to sacrifice. I cannot make you leave the sweet, loaded words that move your hands so predictably, so brutally. But maybe I can help you remember. Remember, body. You are standing in front of me, under layers I believed. Layers of men who have convinced me. Their bodies cover you with plague. So pervasive, so sudden, so many brothers. Husks the voice had moved through. You say you are one of them, that you are dead, and I do not believe you. I think you were buried in poison ground, with the water rising. I think you must be so hungry. I stand on the bridge with my hand out for you. But you were confused. I am strong. I stand on the bridge with my hand outstretched in offering to you. I am the bridge to take you home, under which you would hide and claim or destroy to keep from sharing. But I am brave. I stand over your mass grave and I offer you my hand. All around, there are the bells my sisters and I have left. Millions of little knots forming the cords that reach down to still bones. Billions of little twists making the thread to be knotted. Trillions of flowers, uprooted, soaked, threshed to be spun into thread. So many lives. So many little things left behind in disbelief. All around me is silence. I put my hands in your hands that you might see them. Remember moon? Gibbous quick, crescent nail, motion without conquest, stillness without strain, grip, bond, hold, slide, caress. Remember caress. I see you in there. I feel your vision flicker. Knuckle, wrist, forearm, palm, story, crack, crevasse, crag, caress. You feel my hand and try to remember caress. You cannot stand caress. You are on fire. The reaching light flares up and retreats. but does not let go. You're here. Still here. It is so risky. Heart. I offer heart. I put my hands on you in love like the ward I could never do in defense. Your breast is a soft valley that seems endless and deep. Hair, skin, fat, muscle, bone, lung, heart. Remember heart? I'm looking into you, who doesn't get stared at and takes being seen for granted. You see me by accident this way, in paralysis. I see you focus. The feel of pulse pulling life down into your body. I can feel your palms tingling, your shins crawling, your feet itching, your hair standing on end, your nipples go hard below the sides of my hands. An admonishment in gentle, chiding lilt is fading in the background of you. It grows more frantic and volatile, moving you through jerky motions. You gradually still as it begins to shriek about being hard, being loyal, being brother. Now I begin to solidify in front of you. All the grotesque parts are floated down from dislocation into real. You are my brother. You cannot yet face what it means to be loyal. The thought races through you, and I let you face that alone, in your own time. At last, you are still. At last, you see the twin you have for so long forsaken for the fallacy of a coup, for there can be no replacement. Not for me, not for you. You are my kin, my kind, and once we dwelled in honor together, content, and I would so dwell again. Your hands, once groping and possessive, now flounder with uncertain memory, almost trustworthy. I take your face in my hands, around your jaw like a chalice, my fingers a lacy fringe between your ears and your eyes, where I have so loved to see crinkles curl rolls into the pathways your laughing tears will take. Around your cheekbone, I touch my body to your body, so risky. I gaze into you, open, a dam broken, our tears an ocean of shaky breaths. Remember soft, tender, a pool rippling at every touch, sensitive. I know where you are sensitive. I caress you in ways you cannot touch yourself. I am careful with you, like you do not know to be careful with me. You remember hard. You are hungry. You are not yet trustworthy. But I am willing to risk, to sacrifice to bring you back with me. And so, I offer water. I set you adrift in one side of pleasure. You cannot tell when I'm not convincing, because you've only just noticed I'm there. My beauty is benevolence, a waterfall of hair to drown you in woman. Remember water? I can feel you struggling upwards, the life coursing through you now. You remember being in awe, starving. You were reaching for the cord to sound the bell. You remember my praise. You were reaching out to return the pleasures of ripe, of juice, of warm. You desire to delight. You are caressing me. You are slowing down to listen for me waiting. You are listening for the bell, hoping I will hear you from below. The voice destroyed. You are listening to me. We are together now. Our movements gentle with electric tension. Tiny ripples like shockwaves of raw sense. Together arching. Together crossing. Together, timeless in a rollicking void. Come with me. Lover. Lover. Come back with me. Come back with me. For once, we dwelled in honor together, and we would so dwell again.
You have been listening to The Green Flame, a Deep Green Resistance podcast. You can find us online at dgrnewsservice.org. You can also find us on iTunes, Google Play, and wherever else you listen to your podcast. Please rate the show and leave us a review. Thank you for listening, and until next time.
Is it you I hear whispering through the sequoia? Is it you I hear chant to the rhythm of the sea? Is it you I see dancing on the clouds? Is it you I see flying over me? And the angel of death rides the wind. And the angel of death rides the wind. Osprey, bird of prey on the wing. One step and off this cliff I could fly. Osprey, soar the waves circling. One slip, would you take me under your and the angel